Councillor Williams.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for the presentation. You talk a lot about capacity, but you don't talk much about demand. And you talk about projected. You talk about each line having a 5-minute service, which would meet the required capacity. You don't actually give any figures about the demand that you expect for those lines. So what are the projected demand figures for the lines and for the central area? And it'd be interesting to know what the capacity of one of these vehicles would be. The other point I asked is that on the delivery timescales, you basically give us a year to do the detailed planning and assessment for the tunnel modelling. Now, I think that's a bit ambitious. Given that we've got to provide a tunnel under the city of Cambridge, and not only a tunnel but the approaches to that tunnel, and I don't see out there great swathes of wasteland and empty space for us to build the approaches and the station. I think you're being rather optimistic if you think that you're going to be able to do the detailed plan and assessment for the tunnel design, the environmental assessment and all that within about 12 months.
I'm going to take the next three, or the next two anyway, questions, and then we'll get you some answers. Claire asking.
I'd like to comment that I think this is very good work. I think it's been commissioned well and implemented well, so thank you for all concerned. I'm delighted to see progress, and I'm delighted to see that it's ambitious and progressive. I think that businesses and residents will welcome this with some enthusiasm. I hope they will, because I think it does stand a chance of giving us the step change that we need. So I'm very much in approval and hope that others will catch on.
Helen Valentine.
Yeah, I've got a question about, thank you also, I think it's really interesting and a good progress. Around the, I guess I was surprised at the shortness of the tunnelling, and it'd be interesting kind of what the trade-offs are there, because I think that must mean that it's going in pretty much in the middle of the city and coming out pretty much in the middle of the city. And wouldn't it be sort of intuitive? It seems like it might be cheaper to build a slightly bigger tunnel where you're going in and coming out in perhaps slightly easier places.
I'll deal with that one first. We haven't done a detailed design of exactly where the tunnel would come in and out. I think in terms of a broad principle, though, tunnelling is much more expensive than delivering a segregation at grade. So what we were seeking to do at a reasonably high level is to minimise the amount of tunnelling and make it commensurate and over the geography over which the constraints were greatest, which is the city centre. So I probably wouldn't say it was short. What we've allowed for is a tunnelling of between 4 and 6 kilometres, depending on, because we don't know at the moment in detail what can be delivered at grade and where you would need tunnelling. I think as part of that work we would need to be absolutely cognizant of where it comes in and out. It's going to be the key point, and we don't envisage it coming in or out within the city centre. I mean, that would probably be unacceptable, so we would need to find acceptable locations for it to do so. So if we don't have a sort of definitive, it will be here, but you're right in the general point that you're better off pushing the tunnel to a point where it will acceptably come out.
I think it says 3 to 4 in here.
Yeah. It's 3 to 4 as drawn. I should say in the costing it allows for up to 6. There was a cost range given to the council, reflecting the uncertainty. So. On the capacity point, so we haven't done detailed demand modelling because this is a reasonably high level study at this stage. So there will need to be a detailed demand study that looks at what is the demand on each corridor. What we wanted to do at this stage is develop a concept that delivered a planning capacity that would allow for cater for demand in the shorter term and be future-proof in terms of in the future being able to be catered for demand. And we were quite bullish in that assessment, and we took into account of local plan growth and then effectively double the level of local plan growth beyond 2031 and for a significant mode shift from car to public transport. So we set a capacity threshold that informed the design of the planning requirements that any mass transit system should reach. So it's designed for that capability. The next stage, there will need to be work to actually flesh out what the balance of demand and service provision is on each of the corridors. So the other point was around the tunnel. It's not the case that all of the planning for the tunnel is in a year. It's that there's a lot of design work that would precede the assessment. So it's the assessment period over which, once you've got done at the end of a long design process and you've looked at feasibility and so on, you would then do the assessment of that in terms of its traffic impacts and some of the environmental impacts. So that's what we've got as taking a year, and that itself will build on the initial work that has been done to do that. So it's
Councillor Dick.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to join those that have given this a general welcome. I think if it's done nothing else, it succeeded in centralising the debate about what can be done in this of this nature in the city, and I think that's something that we badly needed, because there have been so many ideas surfaced over the last maybe decades in Cambridge about the way this mass transit service could be achieved, that it was sort of long overdue that we started sort of funneling that down into something where someone could take some sort of tangible action and get some results. And I'm saying that without any intention to cut off the need for whatever we do to be future-proof, but at some point the debate's only worthwhile having if we actually eventually take a decision and deliver something. And so I think this is an important step on the way towards that. I am going to refrain from from my point of view, saying this is all totally brilliant, because we haven't got the full report in front of us, and I think that is, I agree with those people that have expressed regret that we're sort of having a bit of a half-cocked debate, in a sense where we're talking about it a bit, but we're not doing so with all the information that's just about to be made available to the public. So I would hope that we can soon, as an assembly, have a discussion with the benefit of the full report, and that we aren't just permanently jumping over that stage in the process. I think there are going to be, and as with all these things, especially with partial information, you can only have a snapshot of reaction, I think. But there are things that obviously remain to be thought about before one can say that this is exactly the right thing. And I've got three just to illustrate that maybe others would share, I don't know. So the financial sustainability of such a service, that's not the capital cost of buying it and implementing it, but the ongoing financial sustainability of it. Now we're told that this wouldn't require a subsidy, it would pay for itself and all the rest. Obviously that's kind of good news, I suppose, but I think it's really important that we have proper scrutiny about by what assumptions is that said to be affordable for people using it, because they're the ones that will be paying for the ongoing use of it. So how do we know what's in the minds of the consultants actually is also our view of what is affordable and will encourage people to use it. And I think that's something it's a future debate we're going to have when we've seen the full report. And the second example is the observation that I would make from the map, illustrative though it's said to be, is that it does leave in the area of the city itself an awful lot of residents a long way from being able to make reasonable access to it, and therefore get benefit of the service themselves. So if you think about if you lived somewhere in the middle of North Cambridge, it's difficult to see how you have this work for you, because if you wanted to get to the city centre, you'd probably need to go backwards to the perimeter of the city to get to the city centre, or get to the city centre by another means. And so it's clear that if it remains like that, this isn't all there's going to have to be in the way of public transport. And what concerns me a little bit, having said that, is the effect of having the CAM metro system on whatever else we have, because the CAM metro might have an effect on the economic viability of other, say, bus services. And so it may be fine if it can wipe its face with the fare income for itself, but if that removes the ability of other complementary services to do that as well, then we desperately need to think of this in the round. It's not just a question of having a siloed project about delivering this. It's got to be done in the context of a coordinated approach to whatever else we have, and therefore, however this is dealt with in the future, it's really important that it's not done by a team of people who are just getting on with the CAM Metro project. Yeah. It's got to be done by the same people who are also thinking about the effect on the other contributions to public transport. And that's the second example. And the third example is, and I'm not really expecting answers to these questions, I'm illustrating what I think the seriousness and gravity of the future questions to be answered. So there's, on the map there's a stock-marked city centre, and it sounds very logical until you think about the fact we've got two city centres, and from the commercial community's point of view, there's going to be a lot of concern if the metro system appears to service one of them more than the other. The viability of two city centres, some little distance apart, is an important issue commercially, I think, for retailers and other employers and businesses. And so, there's an important issue there about what we mean by the city centre, and are we really kind of catering fairly for, because we could be really disadvantaging economically one part of the city centre if we don't get that sort of question right. Those are illustrations of things that I think are down the line, and they're very serious, and they will affect, I think, in the end, my attitude to whether this is finally the right solution. I would just like to ask a particular question, though, which I think is relevant and necessary for other ongoing things, and that is about the proposals that we've already got in consultation for radial routes, where in those consultation processes, there are options for off-road alignments for public transport, and they have, in the earlier days of conception, been talked about as busways. Now, I have been very happy to see those go forward into consultation on the basis that I think I've been told that those same alignments would equally be applicable to a system that comes out of this process. Listening to the public, that hasn't always been heard or believed, and I would like a sort of a clear statement today that, as far as you are concerned, what we've been told is right, and these alignments to the west and to the south of the city that we're currently consulting people about are genuinely equally applicable to this kind of system. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Councillor Bowden.
I'd like to start off by saying thank you to the officers. I think they've handled this appropriately in what has been a difficult situation, where people are leaking information, and I think the officers got it just about right. I think the inappropriate publicity seeking by the mayor needs to be discussed by this committee because he broke faith with the Greater Cambridge Partnership. But apart from that, I'd like to say thank you very much. It looks good. All the time we've been here, we've had an elephant in the room, which is what happens when it gets to the city centre. And I think that you've given us a good guide on how that might work, and I think that clearly there will be so many other views on that, but I think this is a good guide and it's got substance. And I've just got one question, actually, as brief as I can. How would you see these vehicles coexisting with the existing traffic once they come out of the tunnel? Would you see us having to take further measures, really, to remove that existing traffic, or will you see them as a coexistence? Thank you.
Thank you. Sir Michael.
I endorse all the remarks you've made so far. Very good all round, and brilliant concept, deliverable and sustainable, affordable and so on. But it must not be at the cost of road improvements, other road improvements, and it must not be at it must not overlook all the other interfaces that we have, including where you talk about going out into the country, and I speak more from country possibly. You'll need to make sure at every point where you might be able to get onto one of these buses, for want of another word, that there is parking for those who've got to get to those points.
I've got one final questioner, speaker, whatever. Councillor Smith.
Thank you very much. So this is really a question for officers, please. So while endorsing the comments of my colleagues and picking up on one of Councillor Vick's references to financial sustainability, we've heard from the presentation that this is going to take the best part of 9-10 years to deliver, and that it's going to be phased in order to get it moving quickly and make the best of existing infrastructure and projects that are already well developed. That's fine. But we've also heard that though it has the potential to be commercially viable, that would not be until completion, and particularly is particularly dependent on the vehicles being autonomous, therefore not having to pay for drivers. So we potentially have a number of years of a partially completed scheme which is not financially viable. So where are the subsidies going to come to run these vehicles in that interim period before completion, before the point at which we have the legislation to allow autonomous vehicles, before we have the completed scheme? Because there will have to be subsidies if what we've heard is correct.
You want to take that?
Just on a point of fact on that, we're not saying that it's not commercially viable in the interim. We're saying that autonomy increases. So for example, the guided busways now operate at a profit, and there's no reason to think that other segregated routes could do, and that is part of the next stage of work. So I'm not saying that all it's definitively commercially viable, but we think it has a realistic prospect of being in both the near term.
Through the phase stages as well.
Yeah,
Okay,
potentially. I mean, I cannot be definitive, but it would be wrong to say it's not.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you for that.
If I can just add something, Chair. I think the nature of the questions are good to show the appetite for information, but this was just a very high-level options appraisal, so we don't have all of the detail yet. But also, as Tom said earlier, thinking about demand management is something we have discussed before, and we will be bringing to your next Assembly Board our progress on that. And there are options about how you do that, and one of them is about fiscal demand management, and the potential is that you could use money raised through that means to help support a world-class public transport system, of which this is part, but not in isolation. As we've said earlier, it's about a system working together in a networked way, and that will be something for the Assembly and the Board to consider in due course.
I'm not against subsidies.
Tom.
Okay, a few things there. So I guess absolutely agree with all your points about things that need to be considered in more detail. I think there are 2 points. There's a lot of consideration about what the scheme itself looks like and where the stops are and so on, and that's clearly subject to further work, and the financial viability. Also, that we can't plan this in isolation, so it needs to integrate with what we need to do with the urban bus demand management, and that also picks up the point about what you do further out in terms of parking, feeder services, cycle connectivity. So this isn't seen as a standalone scheme, this is a part of and will have to be found as part of an integrated network, so absolutely agree on that. The point on consultation, I think it's absolutely consistent in that the corridors are seeking to achieve a segregated alignment for public transport, and I think there's some detail to be done around the sort of technical detail, because obviously we've done work for the last 3 months and we've got a concept, and there needs to be some work to make sure how the mechanics of that works, but in principle there is no reason why they shouldn't be entirely compatible, and it's been designed with that in mind. The question then on how it will coexist with autonomous with existing traffic, I guess it's slightly speculative at this stage, but there are, for example, fully autonomous taxis that are being trialled in, I think it's Phoenix at the moment, that are running around in amongst general traffic. So I think the realistic expectation is that at some point autonomous services could coexist with a range of other autonomous services and drive-driven cars. So I think that's speculative, that the most likely way, you won't get there's not going to be a single point where everything goes driver to autonomy. It's going to transition, and the technology is such that there will be a point where you have both operating on the roads.
You've got a question about the existing scheme.
I think they did on the consultation. Yeah.
I'm going to ask our Vice Chair to sum up all the comments from members of the Assembly.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I think there was a general welcome for the study findings, and in some instances quite a lot of enthusiasm for it too, although waiting for the final report, some people wish to reserve judgment, which is fair enough. There's one discordant note about the nature of what has been provided to the public and to members, which I suppose we need to mention in passing. There was some anxiety about the tunnelling, the length of the tunnelling, where the tunnels go into the ground and come out again, and the whole physical nature of the scheme, and that the consequences of its accessibility to all residents of Cambridge, possibly not as universal as might have been hoped. Some anxiety about how the scheme might operationally wash its face, and some touching on potential sources of revenue that could be applied to subsidise, at least in the early stages. A general agreement that the interplay with existing forms of public transport needs to be taken into account very carefully. Indeed, not just public transport, but all other modes of transport. And a concern that most particularly that when this scheme is fully functioning, it shouldn't undercut the workings of other forms of public transport. Given that this study was jointly commissioned by the Greater Cambridge Partnership and the Combined Authority, and as you know, Chairman, I'm a team player, and I like to ensure the smoothest possible joint working among all the local authorities and other public agencies. I'm looking at the schematic diagram on page 10, if other members would like to look at that. And the point that Councillor Bick made, I think was absolutely critical, because of course we already have the busway that goes to St Ives, and we're well advanced in discussions about other segregated transport alignments, which we used to call busways, but we now call expressways. And there seems to me a clear case for a part to be played going forward by the Greater Cambridge Partnership in I mean, obviously not the centrepiece of the tunnelling, that we wouldn't want to tread on other people's toes there, because that was described as the centrepiece, and I think we ought to acknowledge that. But I think there's a key role for the Greater Cambridge Partnership to be involved in the bits of the network that lie within Greater Cambridge, leaving others to develop the wider region as the project unfolds. So that would be what I would like to convey to those charged with making the decision in about a month's time, 3 weeks' time. So.
Lovely, thank you for that. Tim, I think at this point we've got enough to ensure that the board are aware of the Assembly's views as we did in the last meeting. So I think that's fine. My worry about the tunnels is how they're going to avoid all those expensive wine cellars that there are dotted around the city. I think that's going to be an area for them to navigate. To have to navigate those. So can I conclude this item and thank Tom and his team for all the work they've put into this. And thank you very much. So moving on to item 7, the A10 Foxton level crossing bypass and travel hub. Firstly, we will hear the officer presentation. I will then invite the Assembly to have their debate, and we'll seek arrangements for the approach being recommended to the Executive Board. So, over to Chris Tunstall, who's going to introduce the report, which is another one I've got to get my figure out for.
No, this isn't, Chair, and if you really want the short presentation, I could say I commend it to you, but I won't. Chair, Foxton, bypassing of Foxton level crossing has been on the agenda for a number of years. I'm told back in 1927 it was being considered. And what you've got here is a report to the board that will be recommending to the board that we actually look at the bypassing of the level crossing, but not only that we look at a potential for a rail park and ride, a rail travel hub at Foxton. It was considered when we looked at the first round of schemes. It just missed the cut line for the first round of schemes, so it's not on the programme. So what we'll be seeking is approval to actually start re-looking at Foxton level crossing and the possibility of it becoming a travel hub. Why? There's a lot of proposals along the A10. Further down the A10, just to the east or the Cambridge side of Harston, we've got Hawkston, and we're looking at a park and ride at Hawkston just across the M11. We're then looking at extending, in fact it's already been approved to, within its existing confines, put additional car parking spaces into Trumpington. The basis being that, of course, CBC is growing, and we need to facilitate that because CBC, the development on CBC, is reducing the amount of available parking on the site. That's a conscious decision, albeit not to forget that the site itself has substantive outline planning approval for 2 multi-storey car parks, and I think it would be fair to say that none of us actually would wish to see that go on. So go ahead. So anything we can do to actually help with the car situation on the CBC side, and obviously elsewhere as well, is something that as officers we would recommend that we would look at. So from the Foxton point of view, we see this as very much complementary to what's going on at Hawkston, what's going on at Trumpington, potentially what's going on at the Cambridge South site. It makes so much sense to bring this back onto the table to consider at this stage, whilst everything else is being looked at
in the round on this particular arterial route. And the point is as well, that looking at it, that there is a cost-benefit ratio out of this within paragraph 4.1 that is a very high cost-benefit ratio. The figures are between 2 and above 4, the actual figures are around 3. But we need to relook at it, because the work that has previously been done was done back in 2013. You've got that report there, the group report that Network Rail did. Network Rail have a very, I have to say, a view of life, which is the railway. And from their point of view, the only problem with the crossing is safety. And their point of view on safety is that they have a criteria, they assess all their level crossings against the criteria, and as far as they're concerned, Foxton is not high risk crossing. So if we were to rely purely on what Network Rail would like to do, we wouldn't do anything. The situation currently is there are 4 trains an hour. That level crossing can be down by as much as 30 minutes over 30 minutes in an hour. That's going to be compounded. There are going to be another 2 trains per hour, so there's going to be 6 trains per hour. In addition to all of that, of course, which is something for the future, I know not what we can do now, but we can certainly factor it in, is the East-West proposal. And somewhere in that region, in that area, the East-West line from Oxford is going to rejoin the main line into Cambridge. So taking all that work into account, we feel very strongly that this is the appropriate to look at. One other point to perhaps touch on, the growth in Cambridge in terms of traffic since 2011, our latest figures 2015-16 has increased by about 10%. Now that's been patchy, overall it's increased 10%, it has not increased by 10% across all the radial routes coming in. It's particularly increased by more than 10% on 2 routes in question. One is Easton Road and the other is the A10, this section of the A10. So traffic growth is growing as well. What we want to do, we want to get it back in the programme, we want to look at the work that's previously been done, do more analysis on it, do consultation, working closely. We met with Foxton Parish Council, but they realised that it's all dependent on the board agreeing this and the views of the Assembly. But the next stages, which are outlined in the next steps, which are outlined in paragraph 6.2, would see us coming back in December. And that would then put all the information on the table, refresh it all, and then it would be a decision as to whether we indeed do go forward with a proposal about how we actually bypass, whether that be a bridge, whether it be an underpass, what the travel hub would look like. That would all be in the report that comes back in December. Happy to take questions, Chair.
Lovely. Thank you, Chris. I have first Sir Michael.
Thank you very much. Very desirable, if affordable, and I assume that Network Rail must contribute to this. If they're going to be able to block this road for half the time, they've simply got to contribute to it. And I assume we're also having discussions with the Foxton local area and neighbourhood as to how it all fits in with their plans as well.
Okay, we'll take a few and then Chris will come back. Councillor Williams.
Do any of these options affect the possibility of a car park for the station? We're talking about a park and ride facility, but do we, are any of the options considered here going to impact on that?
Thank you. Councillor Smith.
Thank you very much. Okay, so I welcome the fact that we're moving this forward. I think it's it's a shame we couldn't do it earlier, so that's marvellous. I've been contacted by the local member, so I've just got some points that I need to relate to you. One is that the Foxton Parish Council's preference is for an underpass. The reason being that they are concerned that if a bypass will essentially landlock areas of greenfield that they will not then be able to reject for development, and they've already seen a lot of speculative development as a result of the lack of a 5-year housing land supply. So that's a grave concern to them. So I think, you know, they need to be talked to. I gather that they've been to a meeting at Camborne today with Councillor Topping, but I don't know anything more about that. You know, somebody needs to allay their fears or, you know, talk about it further. I've also had some questions asked me about in relation to Barrington. Now, you'll be aware that permission's been given on the quarry site for 250 houses, and I believe one of the requirements of that development progressing is that the cycle link along the old Barrington quarry train line is completed, linking into the A10. So I might have missed reference to that in the paper, so I'd just like to know a bit more about that. And then one other matter, which might seem a very small thing, but small things have a habit of blowing up to be a big deal. On page 43, there's a little paragraph that says, it is understood that the level crossing signal stroke gate box building is not listed, therefore it can be demolished as part of the proposal if considered necessary. Now, you know, I suspect the applications to list it have gone in this week, quite honestly. It's quite a nice, you know, it's quite a pretty Victorian signal box. You know, this is a very crass statement. It shouldn't be there. I suggest it's taken out. I suggest that, you know, we say that we will investigate opportunities for it because it's valued by members of the community to either be relocated or to be offered to someone like the Bluebell Railway or New Valley Railway to be, you know, dismantled and put up somewhere else. But, you know, if we're just saying because something's not listed, it's of no value, you know, that's going to come back and bite us quite badly. So, you know, let's see that one, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Andy Williams.
So I remember when we considered this in the first tranche, that seems like many years ago now, and the only reason we took it off the list was we thought someone else was paying for it. Yeah. So I'd come back to Michael's point, let's try and get someone else to pay for it, but obviously, as we've talked about before, sometimes we need to capitalise things, or nothing's going to happen. So it was a high value scheme then, it's a high value scheme now. The point I want to focus on is the car parking. In this document here it says there's car parking potentially up to 85 spaces. Further on in the document in rural hubs, potentially car parking for 35 spaces. Well, 35 spaces will just take the people who are currently parking on the road, unfortunately. So, and I appreciate it might not be something we want to do, it might not be something that Foxton Parish Council wants to do, but surely we should be considering a mega park and ride, or a bigger park and ride. You know, the 500 to 1,000. Now, I'm not saying that's the right thing to do. Parish Council might think that's a powerful thing to do. But I don't think we really, you know, we're about putting a whole load of infrastructure, creating something which could provide a park and ride with a train link into Cambridge, Central Cambridge. It seems like a strange thing not to consider. In the back of my mind, as we are now in 2018, we do know that in 8 months' time, Papworth staff, all 2,000 of them are coming down the A428 because they haven't got a bus. So they're all coming down the A428, they're all going to come down and they're going to come to Junction 11. And all the nurses, doctors, patients, visitors are going to have nowhere to park. And that's only 8 or 9 months away. Now, obviously the Foxton Park and Ride's a bit further away, but we do need to understand that the need for the Foxton Park and Ride, the need for the Trentford Park and Ride, is not some long-term conceptual thing. The nurses at Papworth need it now.
I've got 3 more questioners, Chris. Do you want to answer the ones that you've been asked so far about, or would you like me to take the next 3 and you do them all at once? Which would
go out on high, we'll do them all at once. Thank you, Chair.
Excellent. Claire.
I'm somebody who's travelled for a few years up and down across the Foxton Crossing nearly every day, so I have in the past actually resisted making any changes on the basis that it delays us, and yes, it's a little bit of a slowdown, but actually there are other bottlenecks that make it. However, the compelling argument from all the papers was the increase in traffic, which I think is coming along very soon, combined with the increase of ingress, so we've got to do something now, so I fully support this coming up the list, provided that we do actually look at it in integration with the rural travel hubs and the east-west connection. Those 2 are so fundamental to this particular point that we need to combine those.
Thank you. Helen Valentine.
Yeah, I mean, people have touched on it already. It seems to me that Network Rail should be contributing to this, and the fact that there haven't been many accidents, well, there might be more accidents if the traffic's going to increase. And I guess it's a question of, I'd like to crack on with this, but if we do that, have we completely thrown away our negotiating power with Network Rail? Should we try and strike a deal with them kind of now before we get on with it?
And Councillor Kavanagh, please.
Yeah, I'm very pleased that this is back on the agenda. One thing I'd like to dispute with Network Rail is that they're saying it's within their judgment a safe level crossing. I mean, if you go around that area as a pedestrian and as a cyclist, I wouldn't regard it as safe at all. So it leads me on to the site. It's good that cycling is mentioned here, but I'd really like to emphasise that it'd be great to have more cycle parking in the vicinity of the station. Plus also, whatever is decided upon, whether an underpass or a bridge, that the cycleway from Cambridge to Royston is, the integrity of it is maintained. And one thing I'd just be interested to know is when it comes to the decision about whether to have the underpass or the bridge, who will be making that final decision? You know, and, I mean, I have a feeling about what I put my hand up and support, but, and I hope I'm not going to be disappointed, but it'd be quite interesting to know who are going to be the real stakeholders who make that decision.
Thank you. Over to you, Craig.
Thank you. Okay, Sir Michael. Yes, and I mean this answers quite a few of us. We have talked to Network Rail. I think it's fair to say Network Rail have made it very clear that from their point of view this is not priority. That does not mean to say we have let it go at that. We are in conversation with the local MP, Heidi, and we will be going down to DFT. So we haven't given up any hope whatsoever of getting money out of Network Rail. The interesting thing is the way that the new control period for Network Rail works is all the improvement money is going back to DFT, it's not with Network Rail, and Network Rail will in future have to bid for that improvement money. So actually the person that holds the strings is the Secretary of State for Transport. So that's where we will be looking. Yes, I think it's fair to say that the fact we put it back on the agenda sort of pulls a little bit of the negotiating strength back, but it will not be something that we do not go and challenge, nor with East West, because we will be talking to East West. The problem with East West, of course, is it's probably a bit further down the line. We understand maybe at the end of the year they'll be announcing where it might rejoin the line, and we know it's in the Foxton area, but quite precisely where will it rejoin the line, because that will make a difference. Is it a 4-track that we're having to go over or under? And that will have to be factored in, but if that's the case, we would expect East West to pay for some of that. But of course it's this leaving it longer and longer and longer, because that is much further down the line. But we've seen the Department of Transport being very keen with Cambridge South, so I'm hoping we will get a very positive response from them in respect of this as well. In terms of the neighbourhood plan for Foxton, yes, the meeting, and it was mentioned about meeting today, it was actually here, it was actually with Tim Watkins and myself and Peter, so we were all involved in that. So we've tried to allay the parish council's fears about this, saying that it will all be part of consultation, we will be working closely with them, and we've already agreed that we will go to the next parish council meeting in March. So we are tying in very closely with their neighbourhood planning exercise, which interestingly has 2 questions on it. Do you want a bridge? Do you want an underpass? My initial question was, do you want something doing with it? Let's worry about what, when we've agreed we need to do something with it. And I'll come on in a minute about the question about who will make that decision ultimately. So in terms of will they proposals affect car parking? No. We will. The whole point of this is it will be all done in the rounds. And figures have been quoted just for clarity. So it's the GRIP report that talked about the 85 car parking spaces. It's the Rural Travel Hub report later on the agenda, but it's not one of those that has been taken forward at this stage that talks about the 35. This is just an example of there's so much going on around there with everything else that this needs to be treated as an integrated approach with everything else that is going on around there. Why we need to look at this now. Otherwise there is a real danger that exactly what people are concerned about will happen. You know, you build a rural travel hub with 35 cars and immediately they all fill up. And that's it. And what have we achieved? Well, we might have got a few cars off the road, but nothing more than that. So certainly the car parking side will be factored in with the options. It will be integral to it. And integral to the point all Network Rail were talking about was bypassing the level crossing. We're talking about potentially, subject to all the approvals, bypassing the level crossing and creating a travel hub. Whether that's 500 to 1,000, I don't want to frighten the horses. I mean, a comparable, just to give you an example, if you were to look at overall numbers, around 100,000 people use Foxton a year. Whittlesford is 500,000 people. Whittlesford, they're looking at 1,000 parking space. So pro rata, you're probably looking in the region of around the 200 plus. But this is all the work that's got to be done. I don't want to preempt anything. This is why we need to re-look at it. Councillor Smith, in terms of the Foxton Parish Council, they've made it very clear. They prefer an underpass. They've talked to us about infill. I fully understand that. These are the sort of issues we're getting from everyone else in terms of looking at the 428, the 1307. It is an issue and we are alive to that issue. So we are keen to try and make sure we address that. In terms of the Barrington development, we do mention in the report the Barrington Quarry in 3.2, but only the quarry. Yes, obviously this will be all part of it. We will. All this is doing is getting us the approval to work on it, to pull all of this in. If I'd have brought the whole report now, I've actually worked on it without any approval. Isn't unknown. But it's something that we obviously need the approval to. In terms of the signal box, interesting one. I think you're pulling that out of the GRIP report. Are you pulling it out of our covering report?
Page 46. Sorry, page 43.
Yes, yeah. So that was the Network Rail initial GRIP report. We're not proposing anything there. I have to be totally honest. When we sat down with Network Rail and they sort of sat on their hands and said, well, I don't think we've any money for this. We said, well, you must save a signal box, that must be a maintenance cost. And their attitude was quite simply, actually, no, we don't. Because by the time we've looked to demolish it, it costs us more because we've got to reconnect all the signalling and actually the maintenance cost is marginal. So they've already told us from their point of view, they don't see a great benefit. And just to reiterate, in terms of Foxton Parish Council, we are fully aware that of their view on that. So, yes, to be honest, we did mention it, just to try and hook a bit of money out at that stage. But from their point of view, they don't see it as an issue that they're going to go in and demolish it. And Foxton Parish Council have made it clear that they wouldn't like to see it demolished either. Andy has mentioned about Network Rail and pay. Yes, we will pursue that, definitely. And of course, the car parking, which I mentioned earlier, the 85 came out of the GRIP report, the 35 is in the Roller Hudson report. I think we're near a few hundred, to be honest, but it's got to be done. In terms of Papworth, that is a really good point. I mean, there's so much going on, and one of the issues that keep coming back, understandably and rightly, is about integrating everything. And we did have a proposal, actually, for Papworth that we worked up with the CBC partners for a travel hub out at Papworth Everard that has sort of got to one side. And it may be something that, from the Assembly point of view, you would wish to see some further work on that being done. Certainly the idea was to have it was a report that was commissioned by the partners on the CBC side. The proposal was, and we'd sort of been involved in that, and I unofficially briefed the board because there's no proposal at this stage. But the proposal was for a 200 parking space to be retained at Papworth Everard, that buses be put on, they would be service buses, they wouldn't necessarily be all day, but they were very long peak hour periods, probably 3 hours in the morning, 3 hours in the afternoon. But there was a cost and there was some subsidy involved in that. And it was something, certainly I was keen on pursuing, and that might be something that, from the Assembly point of view, because it is very much complementary, is this, because there is a question later on the agenda, which I'm taking under the rural hubs item, asking about, well, it's all right looking at these big travel hubs, but surely all these little travel hubs that we're looking at the moment, doesn't that impact and can't that have a beneficial effect? So you don't draw everybody to one place and then integrate them into wherever they want to go, or distribute them to wherever they want to go. You use a series of smaller ones. You might still need your big ones, I still think you will, maybe not the same size. So I will cover that on the Rural Travel Hub paper. So, as I say, that might be something that the Assembly might wish to recommend that we progress on the Papworth side. Claire, the beneficial delays, yes, there is a big increase in traffic going on there, and it will only get worse as the development goes in, and then additionally as the rail increases. What I've just said, we are looking to link these with rural travel hubs, so they're not done in isolation. Helen, the Network Rail contribution, yes, it could stay our hand a little bit on negotiation power. It's who blinks first, but I think it's the right thing to do, and I think we should then take the moral high ground and say, look, this is something you should do. How can you possibly justify having a level crossing on a major route like this down for such a long period of time? Cycle parking is a really good one, no, in terms of it will be something we will build into it. Again, Whittlesford is something we're looking at the moment, and we are looking at making some contribution to cycle parking that Abellio have got a massive grant for from DFT. DFT like to see a bit of contribution going in, so that's great. So we will definitely look at that. And who makes the decision? Well, as a good officer, you make the decision. The board will make the decision.
So the board will make the decision.
Yeah, you'll make the recommendation to the board will make a decision. The board's decision will be on a number of things. Cost-benefit ratio comes into it, but that isn't the be-all and end-all. So an underpass will be more expensive. We know that from the original GRIP study. It's not significant, but the cost-benefit would work it out. And I've said before, although it is London and everything seems to be centric on London, that the Jubilee line, when that was put in, was less than 1. It went in. Can anybody seriously imagine not having the Jubilee line? The other one, of course, is when Bagliello put in the drainage system in London. If you'd have done a cost benefit on that, you wouldn't have even started thinking about it.
Now we've
Yet no mention of Durham.
no.
So I think that's answered all points.
Yeah, I thought it was Basil again.
Councillor Bates, as you are with us, have you anything to add?
I think the only thing I would just remind, actually, we have secured money from Network Rail for other similar projects here. It is not easy, but we have secured money from them in the past.
Thank you. Vice Chair, would you like to sum that up?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Well, I think we're all glad to see this back on the agenda, and as was pointed out, we only took it off the tranche 1 list because we thought someone else would be paying for it, and there's still a strong feeling that someone else should still make a contribution, even if not necessarily paying for the whole of it. A lot of anxiety that there should be adequate parking, and whatever happens here does not impact on the abilities for parking to be provided in association with the station. Some large numbers, but if it helps the local people, the indicative number pro rata for Withersford was in the sort of early hundreds. We heard that there was a preference for an underpass, which is slightly more expensive than an overpass, but that's not a decision for us yet, and it needs a lot further work. It was acknowledged that there's a lot happening in the vicinity, and the additional road and rail traffic have raised the urgency of coming up with some sort of solution here. Don't forget cycling, and in particular provide plenty of extra cycle parking spaces. And there was a fondness expressed for the signal gate box, and should it become surplus to requirements, it should not simply be swept from the face of the earth, but some further use should be found for it, either where it is or somewhere else.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for that, Tim. So at the conclusion of this item, we were asked to comment on the overall approach being recommended to the Executive Board, which I think everybody has done. We've taken those comments on board, and again that will form part of the report that will go from me as Chair of the Assembly to the Board's meeting. So thank you very much everybody for that.